Welcome to the next podcast from Millinery.Info. I'm your host, Lauren Ritchie. Thank you for joining me today for this episode with Louise Macdonald. Louise has been a milliner for over 30 years, with her studio based in the iconic Nicholson building. As you may have learned from our last episode, Louise and I have worked closely together for a number of years, so I hope that in this discussion you'll hear about our dynamic and learn a little bit more about her millinery. I'd like to thank our wonderful podcast sponsors for making this episode possible. The Essential Hat, That Millinery, Hat Academy, Hatter's Millinery Supplies, Lifted Millinery, Hat Mags, Marie D'Antoni Millinery, Louise Macdonald MIlliner, the Millinery Association of Australia, and Hats by Leico. You can find a link to each of their businesses in our show notes, either in your podcast app or on our website. If you've been enjoying listening to this podcast series, I invite you to show your support through Patreon. This is how you can sponsor either a podcast or be a supporter. You can find out more or sign up at www.patreon.com/Millinery.Info. I'd just like to take a moment to thank our recent supporter Patreons who have joined us. With each podcast episode, we share with you some images on our social media, but if you head over to our website, you can see some more behind-the-scenes images relating to this episode. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you enjoy this episode with Louise. Thank you so much, Louise Macdonald, for joining me today on Millinery.Info. It's fantastic to have you back as part of the podcast series. Our first podcast, you were the first episode we spoke about the pieces you had in the National Gallery of Victoria. But I thought it'd be wonderful to have you back on to hear a bit more about your millinery story. So let's go back to the beginning. How did you become involved with millinery?
Oh, great. Well, thanks, Lauren. I'm delighted to be invited back again. Thank you very much. How did I get involved with millinery? Well, that's many years ago. Probably about 30 or more years ago, and I was living in London at the time. I am originally from Melbourne, Australia, but I'd gone to London and I was working over there for the City of Westminster. I saw a short course in millinery advertised in this little paperback book that came out once a year called Floodlight that advertises short courses. So I enrolled and went along, and it was one of the short courses that was taught by Rose Corey down in South London. And of course, I was immediately addicted. And so I did one term and I really enjoyed it. And so I enrolled in another term and then another term. And as many of your listeners will realise, it is quite an addictive thing, millinery. You just sort of get that sort of creative buzz. So I kept enrolling in those courses, and then I met a couple of costume designers, and I sort of became interested in costume, and I met a theatrical milliner, and I was thinking more about that. And so then I applied for a diploma in costume interpretation at Wimbledon School of Art, and I used the hats that I'd made in my courses with Rose as my sort of portfolio. And to my surprise, I got in, and which was great. So that was a career change for me from working in local government to a more sort of creative profession, which is really what I wanted to do. So at Wimbledon, I studied tailoring and dyeing and costume production and that sort of thing. And of course, I also studied millinery there. And then when I finished that course, we had an interview show, and I sent letters around to anyone and everyone who was a milliner in the UK asking for a job, and I got all these sort of letters sent back to me saying no, thanks very much, I can't offer you anything. And then I got one letter back that said, yes, we're looking for a milliner. Oh my God, I couldn't believe it. And that was from Cosprop, which is a period costume company in London, where they specialise in period costume for film and television and also theatre. And they also came to the end of year show at Wimbledon, so they'd sort of seen my work on display, which was all hats. So then I worked for them for 5 years, and I learnt a lot there, really. I had a chance to look at all the previous hats that had been made for different productions, so I could pick them up and turn them inside out and have a really good look at how they were made. And there was another freelance milliner who worked for them, Lil Scott, and she was, had years of experience, and so whenever I got stuck, she was also very helpful. She was freelance and worked off-site, but I was there as their full-time milliner. And so that was a really great learning experience, and also a great sort of learning experience in terms of, historical millinery and period hats. And so, that's how I initially got in. And then I was there for working for Cosprop for 5 years. And then I returned to Melbourne, which is where I'm originally from. And I found a little studio in the Nicholas building, which is where I still am, in the Nicholas building. And for the first 5 years of my career, I hadn't done any fashion hats. It was purely costume and theatre. But there were some very good theatrical millineries in Melbourne when I returned, like Philip Rose and Rose Hudson and Deborah Burson's, all very, and they're still around, and very accomplished milliners. And I just sort of felt like there wasn't enough work to keep everyone happy. And so I thought I need to sort of sidestep into fashion millinery. And of course, the Melbourne Cup, which is the big sort of race meeting that we have each year, is, has very much been part of my sort of my annual sort of calendar, I guess. And that has been, what I've spent a lot of the last 25 years working on. So fashion hats and very, very little costume work. So that's how I got to where I am. Yeah.
And when you were with learning from Rose Corey, were you already interested in making the historic period influence pieces, or was it based on learning particular skills? What were you making when you were learning?
Yeah, no, there wasn't any sort of historical work there. It was more sort of, fashion hats, but I was learning all sorts of different techniques and working with buckram and with the spartry, felt straws. Cinema had just sort of come onto the market then. So, learning to work with cinema. Oh, no, had cinema come onto the market then? Barely. So I don't think I made a cinema hat with Rose, actually. Different sort of vintage materials, straw cloth. So sort of learning the basics. And so that was terrific.
And working at Cosprop, what were some of the productions you got to take part in? Do you remember, or they're all just a blur of hats?
Well, there were hundreds at the time, but I can barely remember. I mean, the two ones that are the most sort of memorable, I guess, are the BBC production of The House of Elliot, a BBC production about two sisters who set up a fashion house in the 1920s, and that got lots of airing. So I worked on those three series, and of course Pride and Prejudice with Jennifer Ely and Colin Firth. That was, I think, the last production that I worked on before I left. Cheese and Worcester, Poirot rather, Shining Through. Quite a few Merchant Ivory films, because the owner of the business, Cosprop, is John Bright, who's a well-recognised costume designer, who was costume designer on lots of the Merchant Ivory films.
And how did that process work? Did you get to consult on how that piece might look, or was it pretty prescriptive with the sketch, or how did those pieces come to life?
Lauren, in the 5 years that I was working there, I think that I might have seen 3 sketches. And I think normally it was just sort of a verbal description, or there might have been sort of photocopies of original fashion plates, or from original sort of fashion magazines of the particular era that the series was set, and a few little notes from the costume designer pointing to a particular hat with a few fabric swatches stapled to the bit of paper, saying something like this. So there seemed to be quite, it depended on the designer, but sometimes you'd have a lot of creative freedom, and sometimes, not so much. But there was always, once you'd of course discuss the materials with the designer. Sometimes they'd have specific ideas, or I'd make suggestions, and then you would get a piece ready for the fitting, and the actor would come in for fitting with the costume designer, and you'd sort of be in the fitting to work out, where to take the piece and what needed to be altered or changed, and go away and finish it, and then it'd be packed off in a box and sent off. So I'd never get to see it until it was, on the screen. So unlike, I guess, in the theatre where you might go to a dress rehearsal or something, I didn't participate in that, because I did very few theatrical. Worked on very few theatrical productions. It was mostly film and television, and there isn't any dress rehearsal there. So Yeah.
Did you watch the series if you knew a hat was going to be in it?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. And hopefully the dresser has put the hat on the right way round. And yeah, but it's fun. It was fun and exciting, and it was a great place to work. And yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity. And you know, and really that's where I learned. You know, got a good sort of grounding of, you know, historical sort of hats and millinery, and yeah, got much more of an idea. Yeah.
And coming to Melbourne and shifting into a fashion focused creative pursuit, what were some of the adaptations you had to make to your making?
Oh gosh, lots. Well, one, I became the designer rather than, you know, theatrical millinery. The costume designer is the designer, but and you're working from, you know, someone else's subconcept. But as a fashion designer, I had to come up with the you know, the designs, and then of course, you know, I'm working sort of directly with the customer, so working out how to work with the customer. And my God, that was a learning curve, I can tell you. As you know, it probably comes more naturally to some people than other people, but you know, that sort of, you know, negotiation sort of process with the client to work out what they want and what I wanted to do. And I think at the start, really, I let the customer lead me, but now I would say that I lead the customer in terms of their choices and knowing what I can do and what I want to do and what I think suits them. So yeah, there was a big learning curve in that regard. Another difference there was that, you know, I was working with different materials. So the materials that I would use in theatrical millinery were sort of often different to the materials that I'd use in fashion. So with fashion hats, I would be using cineme, parasite straws. I did a little bit of a felt collection. But when I was working in theatrical millinery, I never used cineme, I'd never used parasite straw, because, you know, they were wanting authenticity, and those sorts of materials weren't around in, you know, 1815 or the 1920s, or well, parasite might have been around in the 1920s. But yeah, so I'd be using straw braid, or making fabric covered hats, or using sort of espartry covered in fabric, or military buckram, or yeah, that sort of thing. So yeah, that's another sort of different sorts of materials.
Yeah. When you launched as a fashion label, what was your approach to that?
When I launched as a fashion label, what was my approach? My approach was, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing, but I need to make a living from this. I need some money. How do I get customers? So it was a little bit sort of disorganized. If I were to do it again, I would say that I should have, you know, done some business courses and some marketing courses, and had a much more sort of methodical approach. But I sort of made it up as I went along. I started off, I was doing a little bit of theatrical work when I came back, so there was a little bit of money coming in there, but then I had no sort of clients. So I started off in sort of some upmarket markets, selling my hats there. Of course, you know, they had to be sort of, you know, fairly inexpensive, but I'd have a range of cheaper ones, some sort of pre-block bases that were just sort of decorated, and other ones that I'd made myself, trying to sort of trade on my sort of House of Elliot experience, which back then everyone has heard of. And so I did get a few customers through that. And through that, I also learned how to work with clients and customers. I also, my partner, who I think I was with them that stage, he comes from a sort of a small business background. In my family, everyone has been employed, and I'm the only self-employed person in my family, but my partner, everyone in his family was self-employed. So he gave me some really useful tips about, you know, how to sort of, you know, build up a mailing list and, you know, a database. I don't think we used that word back then, but anyway, so how to promote myself a little bit. He had some good tips there. And I did get a little bit of advice, you know, about counting and that sort of thing, but really it was step by step, making it up as I went along. And of course, made a few not mistakes, but, you know, I had a few learning curves there when I think I'd do that differently. But, you know, I learned along the way.
And the pieces that you were making when you first launched, what did those look like?
What did they look like? Oh, well, I'll tell you what they didn't look like. They don't look like the sort of they don't look like the sort of work that I do now. I think now, I think that people tell me, and I think that it's true, that I do have a sort of signature look, but my signature look really hadn't developed then. So I was new to sort of fashion millinery, so I was really, that was a little bit of a hodgepodge. But, I might have used lots of feathers on a few pieces, but I don't use feathers at all now, or not at all, but hardly ever use feathers now. I hadn't sort of got my look established yet. So I'm just trying to think of some of the ones, very 90s looking. big top hat crowns, big brims. I've always loved the beret, though. I was doing berets back then, and I still love berets, bigger brims. Yeah.
And as you worked through discovering and defining your aesthetic, was there a moment when you've created a piece and that was it, and you're like, this is what I want to be making, or is it an evolving process?
It was an evolving process, but I think that what I started sort of moving towards was, back then, the trim on a racewear hat was feathers or flowers. And journalists would ring you up and say, oh, what's in season this year? Feathers or flowers? And you think, oh my God, is there an alternative? And at some stage, I guess it's with Cinema, but I can also recall I was using some straw back braids at the time. I started using just the straw or the braid to make my sort of trim on the hat. And I like to make a trim that had sort of movement and flow to it. And I think that was the start of my evolving into my own sort of, my own look. I think still my hats, they tend to be sort of fairly simply embellished, so not lots of feathers and flowers, often sort of trimmed in the same, material that I've used to make the hat out of, and with some sort of sculpture that sort of flows.
And what have been some of the key successful projects or events that you've been involved with that have been a great success for your business?
Look, there's not, singular sort of great big events, but there are a few, and there's more than a few actually that all add up to something. And I think one of the things has been where I've teamed up with another creative business. So the first one that I teamed up with was a fabric shop called Her Story that was in Little Collins Street in Melbourne, run by two women, and they sold beautiful fabrics, and they also had sort of an on-site designer, dressmaker, tailor, who made up the fabrics in the store. So they either sold the fabrics or customers came in and they had an outfit made. I teamed up with them, and so I would make hats for some of their clients who needed a hat. And I got some very good customers from that. One still come to be now, sort of 25 years later. And then I teamed up with another local designer, Victoria Loftus. Her label isn't around anymore. She's now got a shop in country Victoria called Manteau Noir and has another label. But Victoria designed beautiful clothes, and she had a lovely shop in Little Collins Street in Melbourne again. And I would make hats, and she'd sell them in her shop. But she had beautiful clothes. She really liked my hats. And it was actually really fun collaborating with her, because she would come to my studio, and I would have out a whole lot of materials, and often some vintage materials that I would have got from Job Warehouse, which is this old fabric shop that's no longer around, up the top of Burke Street in Melbourne, and bits and pieces that I collected over the years. And so I'd had no idea what her collection would look like, but she would choose materials, like 3 different materials that I would certainly not normally choose to put together, but she'd choose them, and she'd say, oh, can you make a hat out of this? Something that's soft and flowing. And I think, oh, right, okay. So soft and flowing was the description, and I had 3 materials that I wouldn't normally combine together, but it really, it led me off in a direction, that I really enjoyed, and forced me to sort of be sort of creative and yeah, so working with her was terrific, and I worked with her for several years. And of course, when her shop closed down, I had clients from hers that come to me. Sometimes her clients would come to me directly if they wanted a specific hat for an outfit. And then I was going to say more recently, but no, it's not more recently. It was about 12 years ago, and collaborating with Hugo Boss in Australia and designing hats to go with their collections. And of course, with all those, which has sort of been great for me, and that's brought sort of more clients my way. But with all of those, with her story and Victoria Loftus and Hugo Boss, it was a mutual respect that we had for each other. So they had something that I wanted, clients, and I had something that they wanted, some beautiful hats. So they were great at selling my hats, and I loved trying to sort of please them as much as possible. So those sort of three connections have been good sort of connections throughout my career. I don't do this anymore because it's just so exhausting going out and doing what some people might know as a trade show or something, but going to racing events and having stands there and selling your hats, so you get sort of more customers that way.
Did you do any trips internationally to branch out your customer base?
Yes, I did. I would go to Dubai for it was probably for about 5 years. In March, I'd go to Dubai and sell my hats at a shopping mall there in the lead up to the Dubai World Cup. So that was always a good thing to do. And of course, that was in March, and my busy time of the year is October and November. So, it balanced, quite well with the peak season here in Melbourne to go to Dubai. I mean, and Lauren, I have to say that another thing that did help me in launching my career was Millinery.Info.
Yes. And we should mention that as well, because
and did you know?
That's what this is how this platform started, isn't it? Let's get it from the source of the truth. How did Millinery.Info start?
Well, I have to say that it started with my partner who works in IT, and he said, you should set up a sort of an education website. And and I said, what are you talking about? Anyway, so he sat down at the computer and he got this website, Millinery.Info, going, and he started getting a dictionary together. And this is before social media was around. And putting up a few different things. And then I started taking photos at different sort of hat events and posting it on Millinery.Info. And then we started interviewing milliners from around the world, not on podcasts, but just written sort of interviews with the milliners from around the world. And at that stage, there were no other sponsors, not like all your lovely sponsors that you have now, and I was the only sponsor. And I feel that really was of benefit to me in terms of getting my name known sort of on a more global level rather than an Australia-wide or Victorian state sort of level. So I do have to thank Millinery.Info and my partner and you for taking the reins and taking it to the next level. So that did make a difference. And that was before social media was around. And then when social media came in, people could see other people's sort of hat photos on social media. But before that, Dubai World Cup and the Melbourne Cups and things, I'd be out there. Some of you may remember me taking photos if you lined up to go in fashions on the field competitions and that sort of thing, and posting them on the website. So, lots of other things I think sort of help me along the way. Having good people work for me, and don't go red, but Lauren, who was interviewing me, also worked for me for, it was about 7 years, Lauren.
Yes.
And, it's, those of you who do employ someone else, when you've got someone who is your right-hand person and you can sort of rely on so heavily and so well, it really does make a difference to you being able to run your business and being able to sort of focus on things. So I've been lucky with you, and I've had 2 other people work with me in my previous earlier years who it's been definitely helped. And I can also think of a couple of people who've come and done extended periods of work experience with me. Miriam, oh gosh, we loved having you come and do work experience with us that spring. So it's all added to the mix, and I'm very grateful because I couldn't do it on my own.
Well, it was an absolute honour, and we had a lot of fun. A lot of fun. Moving on from me though, because we're here talking about you.
I'm sorry about that. I couldn't mention you at all, but
No. And today you do a lot of teaching and sharing of your skills to help the I was going to say next generation of milliners, but helping milliners continue to establish their skill set. How did you first start teaching?
Oh, well, when I came back from London, I was asked to present at the CAE, which is the Council of Education. So I gave a little talk there. Of course, I was so nervous. And a couple of other places, the National Gallery, the members of the National Gallery asked me to give a talk. And so I started off just giving a little bit of a talk about my sort of theatrical experience. And then I started teaching practical classes at the Council of Education, and then it went on from there. So I've taught at Kangan Institute, which is our local TAFE college here, Central Gippsland TAFE in Morwell, Swinburne TAFE. I've taught some costume millinery there for about 12 years. Or one artist in residence program at Box Hill Senior Secondary College, which was really fun. And I now run my own courses in my studio, and I've been to Europe and America once to teach at Millinery Meetup, and I'm going to be teaching with them again this year, but it's going to be online in Europe with Lena Stein and Pierre Millinery Supplies. And then with Hat Academy more recently in the last couple of years that I've really enjoyed teaching online, through video courses. So I've been doing it for about 20 years, and I have to be honest with you that I probably wasn't a very good teacher when I started. I really had my trainer wheels on, but I feel like I have, like you do with anything, if you sort of practice, I have learned sort of more over the years, and I feel much more confident in my presentation and the way that I can transfer knowledge to people. I've enjoyed it, and one of the things that I don't forget is when I was first learning millinery with Rose Corey, and I loved it. It was just such a buzz, and it was just so exciting, and it was just lovely being to be able to sort of be creative like that, and so nice to be able to pass on that sort of joy, or give people that joy themselves. And people do, as lots of people who are listening to this podcast will know, it is it's really nourishing. It's really nourishing, creatively nourishing, and I love it.
So with Hat Academy and teaching for your students, how do you decide which skills or which techniques you'd like to present and share?
Yeah, I've loved working with Elaine and her team at Hat Academy in the last, I think, 2 or 3 years. So Elaine looks at my work and makes suggestions of techniques that I use, and to see whether I'd be interested in sharing them with other people. And she might come up with some suggestions of how that might be structured. And then I sort of come back with it, either thinking, yes, that's a great idea, or why don't we do it this way, or how about we do this, or but I think this might be. So we work it out between each other as to what we might sort of present. And of course, she's got a great bank of students, and she knows what her students' needs are and what they're looking for. And so we work it out between each other that way. It takes quite a bit of preparation to get the classes ready, which is great. I like to be prepared. I like to be prepared and organised. So it's at least about a month of solid work of getting samples made and getting ready for the filming, and then I sort of, Elaine and her team sort of film the course, and then they edit it and work out the release. But they provide really good support to students in terms of support after students bought the course, in terms of newsletters and support groups and chat groups and assistance with particular questions. So it's a great setup.
What are some of the most important skills that you believe a student should be establishing when they're learning and training?
There's so many answers to that question. I just sort of don't know where to start. Because, first of all, I was think, the basics, how to manipulate wire, how to block, or how to work with a flat pattern. I thought, oh gosh, it's not just that. You really, if you're wanting to become a milliner, really, you need marketing skills, you need business skills. But, so my sort of initial response is, you need to get an overview before you start, presenting yourself as a milliner and a business. You need to sort of get an overview. But then I think, look, there's some people who they've got marketing skills and business skills and focus on one particular sort of material or technique, who've made great success of their business. Difficult for me to say. I'm a milliner who sort of uses, relies on my sort of traditional training. But there's always new ways of doing things. So that's it's a difficult one to answer. But what I should say is, not should say, but sort of want to say is that, when you ask me what are the most important skills, I think that, millinery is sort of, really changing at the moment. We're having to stop and have a little bit of a rethink. And, for myself, I've been thinking about, how sustainable is my business? And so, I'm giving a lot of thought to that at the moment, and I would encourage other people to do that. If you're wanting to become a milliner, that you should really put that on your list to sort of think about further.
So once a student learns a particular technique, what's your advice for someone about transitioning that into their own work?
Now, that's a very good question, Lauren. That is a very good question, because I'm sure we've often sort of seen people sort of do a particular workshop, and often workshops skills based around a particular sort of style of hat. Everyone wants to complete the course with finished product, and that product often looks like the tutor's hat. So what advice do I give people to adapt those techniques to create something new, which I think that they really need to do to develop their own sort of style, so they can make a hat and sell it as a piece that is designed by Lauren Ritchie or whoever's sort of done the course. In doing a course, people are learning how a material works in a certain way, and so a challenge would be, once they've finished that ribbon beret course or that buntle trim course, is to perhaps use the same materials, because materials respond differently, but use the same material, but set yourself the challenge to make a completely different design, because it's you're learning a technique, and you want to be able to use that technique to create your own designs. So you need to sort of set yourself that task, so you can claim that design as your own. And that's the joy, that's the enjoyable bit, really. I think that's the cream of being a milliner, is coming up with new designs. And yes, you have plenty of failures, I can tell you, but when you have success, you think, oh yes, and then you can sort of take it further in another direction. But I know it's challenging, and some people say I'm not creative. I think if you want to set yourself up, selling your own designs, you need to take the bull by the horns there.
Make it your own.
Make it your own, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the last, we're turning into the 18-month mark of COVID impacting globally, and it's changed many landscapes. How has this impacted your collections, your teaching? What changes have you made to adapt to the current climate?
Well, the first thing that probably people who sort of follow me are probably aware of is that I've been presenting courses on Zoom, and that was a real learning curve for me. I'm a completely untechnical sort of person, and my IT partner was living in another part of the state at the time, so I was home alone for 4 months, and I thought, oh my God, I've got to work out how to do this myself. But with the help of some other milliners like Catherine Ellen and Sandy Aslett and Lena Stein, we all helped each other out and did little test runs, and gave each other ideas. No, you've got to move your camera in a different direction. Your camera needs to be here. And you've got to download this. And anyway, got there in the end, and bought some equipment on the way. I couldn't buy a webcam because everywhere was sold out of webcams. So anyway, started presenting Zoom classes. So I enjoyed the challenge, and I also enjoyed connecting with other people around the world, all through my sort of computer screen. So that was one way. Another way is with my collection. I mean, I didn't have a collection last year, 2020, but I will have one this year. But one of the things I also focused on was, my own professional development, which I really have not allowed myself much time for in the last 25 years, but there was plenty of time last year. So I did some professional development in terms of, my own business and working out where my focus was, and working out what I was interested in and where I wanted to go and what the essence of my business was. And then sort of more recently, actually I'm still doing it now, but I am loving it, is a course on sort of sustainability in fashion that's run by Claire Press, who's, some of you might be familiar with, a journalist and educator in sustainable fashion. And it's really making me think about where I want to go and what I want to do with my business in the future. I mean, we're all sort of, becoming aware that, if we're not already aware that, there is a climate sort of crisis, a climate challenge, and fashion is a contributor to that, in the amount of fashion that goes into landfill and the amount that we sort of consume. And I think, how many Louise Macdonald hats are heading off to landfill, and what am I sort of supporting here? So I'm thinking I'm feeling inspired by doing this course, and I'm feeling really inspired about how I can sort of structure my business to be able to operate more sustainably. So, looking at things about what materials am I using, and what processes are involved in those materials. What about the workforce who creates those materials? What sort of packaging do I have? What processes am I using that are contributing to sort of carbon footprint or global warming? And what can I do to slow that down? Or
Sounds very interesting.
Stay tuned. Stay tuned. But I think that it's challenging, and probably a lot of you are sort of listening to this. Maybe some of you have given it much more thought than I have. Some maybe not so much. But millinery. I mean, yes, we're a small sort of part of the global fashion chain, but we're all contributing in our own way to sort of global warming. And me as a fashion consumer, I mean, I love clothes. I love going clothes shopping. But what was one of the statistics in the course? It said, Australian women buy on average 27 kilos of clothes a year and throw away 23 kilos. And I thought, yeah, that's probably me, although I don't throw away that many. I've got a big wardrobe. But whereas Italian women on average buy 15 kilos a year. So that's a bit of a difference. I thought, quality, reinventing. So it's making me think about my own choices as a consumer, but also my choices as someone who runs a fashion business, really, and what I can do to educate myself, change my business, and educate my customers. So interesting and challenging.
Yes, absolutely. And you touched on their quality of workmanship, quality of fashion products, and this always has a correlation to pricing. How do you approach pricing, not necessarily specifics, but just as a general philosophy, and ensuring that you're making a living from the luxury accessories that you make?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And it's, that's why I'd recommend anyone who's starting out at business get some financial or accounting advice on how to charge and what you should be charging. When I first started out, I did do some 1 or 2 workshops that were sort of quite helpful, giving me advice about how I can price my sort of work. But I have made a living from this business over these years. I've had to make a living. I've wanted to make a living. And initially, I wasn't charging enough for my work. And soon sort of realised that working 7 days a week and earning below the minimum wage is not sustainable emotionally, physically. So more recently, I went to a workshop back in the day that was run by the Craft Council, I think it was, or Craft Victoria or something. It gave me a good sort of starting point to how to work out my business in terms of, all the things to consider. You needed to have an idea of your, annual expenses to be able to work out how you needed to incorporate them into your pricing. But, it is essential. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to make a living. And also you're affecting the whole market, really. If there's so many people underselling themselves in the millinery market, then you're underselling the millinery trade, really, I think. As my hats have got more expensive over the years, I find that people, if you can't find people to spend the money on your hats, or they're telling you that they're too cheap, then they're not your customer. You need to find other customers who are able to who appreciate the work that you do and the quality. If people try and bargain you down, then you need to turf them as customers or educate them, really. And people are open to be educated. I can think of a few things that I've said to customers over the years.
And what might a few little snippets be that you could offer a customer who maybe is challenging you on what is, you're producing, let's generalize, a handmade custom one-off piece, and they've walked in and commented on the expense of the objects?
Well, I might explain, how many hours or what sort of hourly rate they think that I might deserve, or not deserve. I know what I deserve, but suggesting to them that if they're wanting a discount, then I'm going to have to discount the hourly rate that I pay myself, or if they want a discount, I can take something off the hat. What would they like to lose from the hat? I remember someone who was, fairly, obviously well off, said, "Oh, can you do it any cheaper?" And I just said, "Why? Oh, can't you afford it?" And she obviously could afford it.
And with your clients that come to you, for those, I'm very familiar with your process, but for those who maybe not so, do you create collections? How does someone come to you for a custom order? What does that process look like in a regular non-COVID time?
In a regular non-COVID time, well, I work out. I create a collection for the season, which is normally spring. I used to do a winter collection, but really I don't have enough of the winter customers, so I'd create a collection for the spring. And when the customer comes in, if it's a new client, I ask them whether they've been to my website so they can see the sort of work that I do, because I want to save myself time and I want to save them time. Because if they see my work and it's not, it doesn't appeal to them, that's sort of fine. And, I can sort of direct them sort of elsewhere. So when they go to my website, they can see the sort of work that I do, and they can also see the price of my work. So they've got a little bit of an idea already what they're going to be paying. And then when they come in, we try on things from the range as a starting point. And once I've seen the outfit that they might want to team it up with, talk about, what would suit the outfit, what suits them, and what sort of, variations can be made to the original sort of starting point or hat that I've tried on their head. And then we go from there. And then they always come back for a fitting. I find that's a really important process. Communication with your client is key. And so when they come back for the fitting, they can sort of, see the hat half made on their head, and they can see how it feels on their head. And, it's an opportunity for them to say, "Oh, look, I'm not sure about this," or "I'm not sure about that." Normally it goes pretty well, but if I can see someone's not looking sort of too confident, I definitely encourage them to sort of speak their mind, because, I say, "Look, now's the time I can do something about it. I can't do anything about it when you come to pick it up." And I can, unless they want a completely new color or something. I thought we decided that in the first consultation. Yeah, so then it goes from there. So generally with that process, people are very sort of happy with the outcome. Of course, with people ordering online and going through that process online, I find it a lot more difficult, because online you can't see the proper sort of, color selection on a computer. So sometimes it's sort of posting out samples of swatches of colors. But if they don't come in, you can't give advice about whether it's sort of going to suit them. You can a little bit in terms of whether their height or the shape of their face that you can tell from a screen, but just standing there and having it on their head and showing them how to wear it properly, the in-person fitting is the one that works best.
And one strategy which you use, which I think is really helpful, is if you have them there with the hat on their head in the right spot, to take a photo of them wearing the hat. I think that is a really good safety stop for yourself, because once they walk out the door, it's up to them to be able to feel confident about placing the hat.
Yes, too many times, Lauren, I have not that I go to the racetrack often, but because a lot of my customers have, been people who go to the races, but, too many times I've been to the racetrack and I've seen that they've had the hat on back to front or, tipped back on the back of their head. So yes, I learned from that. And yes, as you say, getting them to take a photo on their camera with it in the right position and encouraging them to refer to that when they're getting dressed in the morning, or the hairdresser has a look at it and, fingers crossed, it's in the correct position.
So what's some upcoming projects we can look forward to seeing with Louise Macdonald MIlliner?
Well, I'm working on my spring collection. And I've got another course being released with Hat Academy. I think it's due in August, again with some buntle mats. So we're doing some caps and berets from buntle mats without the use of blocks. So a lot of the Hat Academy courses are based around not having to buy. I love hat blocks and very envious of some of the beautiful ones that I see on Instagram and social media. But I'm aware that people, when they first start out, it's a bit of a business, buying the equipment and that sort of thing. So with Hat Academy, I've tried to devise courses where, you don't have to go and buy specifics of block. So the caps and berets is coming out with Hat Academy in August. I've got a few things coming up with Spring Fashion Week, Melbourne Spring Fashion Week in September, being prepared for in-person or online. However, our restrictions and our sort of COVID infections go. Something else that's coming up is the Millinery.Info Millinery Maker campaign. In fact, I think we're right in the middle of it, aren't we? And yes. There is the opportunity to win. There's 3 free spots actually that I'm offering for my ribbon beret course on April the 8th and 9th. It's a course, virtual course by Zoom. So if you subscribe to the Millinery.Info newsletter and participate in the Millinery Maker campaign, we will be choosing a winner on August the 1st. And if it's you, I look forward to seeing you on my ribbon beret course. Otherwise, you're very welcome to come and register in the course through my learnmillinery.com website.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me for today's podcast, Louise. It was great to have you back on Talking Hats with me.
Lauren, I've loved it. Thank you very much. It's so nice to have a chat with you and to have a chat with everyone else out there. Come and connect with me on my social media, Louise Macdonald MIlliner, on Instagram or Facebook. Look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Millinery.Info with Louise. I'd like to thank our Patreon podcast sponsors, The Essential Hat, That Millinery, Hat Academy, Hatter's Millinery Supplies, Lifted Millinery, Hat Mags, Marie D'Antoni Millinery, Louise Macdonald MIlliner, the Millinery Association of Australia, and Hats by Lico. You can find a link to each of their businesses in their show notes, either in your podcast app or on our website. You or your business could show your support by becoming a Patreon of Millinery.Info. There are 2 tiers available: a podcast sponsor, which means your business or event is mentioned in our podcast, link included on our website and in the monthly newsletter. This starts from just $15 per month. The other option is a supporter tier, which is from just $5. It's for those who would like to quietly show their support, but ensure that we can keep producing the content you see here on Millinery.Info. If you have any questions about becoming a Patreon, I'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, to sign up, visit www.patreon.com/Millinery.Info. I'm your host, Lauren Ritchie. Thank you for joining me for this episode, and I look forward to talking hats with you again soon.